Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to yet another virtual meeting of Heritage Oakville. Everybody's working remotely today. There are some issues up at the town hall, so everybody's working from home today. We have six discussion items and one information item today, and we've got 6 delegations who have pre-registered, and the IT people will manage their comings and goings as the meeting goes on. The agenda and materials are available at oakville.ca for anybody who's watching. They can look for that and pick it up there. As usual, we'll all be muted during the course of the meeting. When you wish to speak, if you indicate that, I will make up a speakers list and call you in. Unmute yourself. You know the drill. I don't need to repeat it again. I'll remind everybody that we are an advisory committee and that the recommendations that we make go to the Planning and Development Council, which meets on Monday, the 7th of March at 6:30. And I guess since it's a Monday, anybody wishing to delegate at that meeting to speak to any of the items that we're moving on to council would have to pre-register on Friday, the 4th of March by noon. Okay, have we any regrets, Madam Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, regrets are received from Daniela Hampton-Davies.
Good, thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interests with respect to any of the items before us today? Seeing none, we'll move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meetings. These have been circulated. Can I have a motion to approve? Councillor Duddick, thank you. We have a motion to approve the minutes as circulated. Anyone opposed to that motion? The motion is carried. So before we move into the work of today, Leslie has a couple of things she wants to share with us. So Leslie, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to take a moment of appreciation for the work of Elaine Eigel, who's been on contract with us for nearly 5 years. Initially as a part-time researcher, but more recently as a heritage planner focused on research. Her contract is coming to an end on March 4th. And her work with us has been invaluable, as you know, in advancing the heritage work program in general, in particular with respect to the cultural heritage landscapes, the Ercles Estate, the Knox 16 Church, the Gerlach Gardens, the Bronte Cemetery, the Joshua Creek Heritage Arts Center, Oakville Harbor, and most recently she's been helping with the property information sheets for everything in the Old Oakville Heritage Conservation District. So that's been very helpful. But I know anyone who's encountered Elaine has found her to be just the loveliest person, and we all sincerely appreciate all of her hard work. And we're going to miss her. So I just wanted to let you all know that. So there'll be some changes in heritage going forward. We'll have to redistribute our staff resources a bit. And on that note, my time as your acting manager of Policy Planning and Heritage is coming to an end at the end of this week. And Kirk Bigger, who's on the call, my colleague, he's taking over in the acting manager role starting next Monday. So he'll be with you for your next Heritage Oakville meeting. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Leslie. Yeah, I think all of us here have worked with Elaine in the past. And you're right, she's just wonderful to work with. And in the last, I guess the bulk of her time with us, it's been in the background. And we've just loved to read those reports that she has been a part of with respect to cultural heritage landscapes and all kinds of interesting things. So I'm sure I speak for everybody in thanking Elaine for her contribution. And thank you to Leslie for being support to the Heritage team. And Kirk, we've worked with you before in the past, so I'm sure we're going to enjoy whatever spell we have with you too. So that's sort of interesting news today. We wish Elaine all the very best, and we wish you, Leslie and Kirk, all the best too, especially Kirk, because he's now got to carry the load. Okay, so we move in now to the work of today. So item 4.1 is a heritage permit application for 272 Spruce. And I'm just looking to see if I can see him. I think it's David that's doing this one. Yes, there you are, David. Okay, yep. Over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I have a presentation for this heritage. There it is. So this is a heritage permit application for the Part 5 designated property at 272 Spruce Street. Next slide, please. So the property is the third property east of Trafalgar Road on the south side of Spruce Street. And you can see it there circled on the aerial image. Next slide, please. A little background on the property. It is designated under Part 5 as part of the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation District and includes a two-story stucco-clad home with front gable that was built circa 1920. The front foyer projection and west side living space and garage addition had been added by 1949. This is a heritage permit application for the construction of a new covered front porch with wood railing and side entry door into the west side of the front foyer projection. The porch will be open at its sides and will form an L shape that wraps around to the west side of the home to the chimney. Next slide, please. So you can see on the photo on the left, it shows the existing front entry that will remain as is. The proposed new entry door will be added to the west side of the front foyer projection, as I mentioned, which is currently a solid wall, as you can see on the photo on the right. Next slide, please. Here is another view of the west side of the front foyer projection where the new side entry door is proposed. Next slide, please. And a view of the addition and the attached garage that is on the rear part of the west side of the home. Next slide, please. Here is the site plan provided by the applicant, which shows the proposed porch on the left side there that sort of wraps around the front of the home. And this gives you an idea of a sense of scale of the porch compared to the size of the home. Next slide, please. Here is the ground floor plan for the proposed porch. So you can see the porch there on the right-hand side, and it is slightly inset from the front foyer projection. Even the stairs are kept within the basically the footprints of the front foyer projection, which you can see on the left-hand side, and which is proposed to remain as is. Next slide, please. Here is the front elevation of the home, and you can see the front foyer projection on the left-hand side and the porch right beside it. You note that the railing that is shown here is a clear glass railing. So this was simply chosen on the drawing to represent the height and location of the proposed railing and to allow a clear view towards the house. However, the proposed railing will be a wood railing with wood spindles. And I'll speak a little bit more about the railing in a moment. Next slide, please. Here is the west side elevation showing the proposed side entry door into the foyer projection. So the new door is intended to essentially look like the existing front main entry door, and it's being made of wood and will have a glazing in the top third as pictured here. Next slide, please. So in terms of the new railing, on the left is the neighboring home that's located to the east of the subject property. So you can see 272 Spruce Street on the right-hand side here. The applicant has indicated that the proposed wood railing on the new porch will have a similar appearance to the wood railing on this neighboring property. Staff have recommended a condition to the approval of this application that includes providing staff with the final details of the appearance of the proposed railing. Next slide, please. So in terms of the heritage assessment, the proposed porch is appropriate to the scale of the existing house. The porch roof will attach perpendicularly to the existing front foyer gable and at a lower height. The porch's depth on the front elevation is also slightly inset from the length of the front foyer, and on the west side of the home, the porch's projection is limited to approximately 5.5 feet from the west side wall. And so as a result, it won't block any substantial views to the addition that was built by 1949. The porch is a simple design that will not compete with a simple vernacular form of the existing home or result in the removal of any heritage features. The existing front-oriented entrance will be maintained as well as existing pathway. The new entry door will be oriented to the side and won't visually compete with the existing main entry. The proposed materials are compatible with the home and the Heritage District. And while the existing front garden will need to be removed to facilitate the construction of the porch, a new garden will be replanted to maintain the landscape character of the front yard. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the staff recommendation, it is for the approval of the proposed covered porch with new railing and side entry door, subject to the applicant providing staff with final details on the appearance of the new wood railing and door for final approval, and that the heritage permit expire 2 years from the date of final approval by council. And that's it from our presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Super, thank you, David. Very clear. Are there any questions of David on his presentation? No? Okay. Now, I think we have a delegation registered, Mr. Eric Day. Mr. Day, I don't know if you want to add anything to what David has told us. If you can unmute yourself. We don't have to see you as long as we can hear you. Right.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
I don't have anything to add. That was a very complete presentation that David put together. I wanted to be present in case there was questions that, you know, myself, and I'm here with Jamie Coles, he's my business partner. So if there was questions that either one of us could answer, that was why we thought we would join the meeting.
Super, we appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Day. Does anyone have any questions to ask of Mr. Day now that he's here? Nope, good, fine, thank you. So we can move in now to the board. Any comment or discussion on this application? Would somebody like to give me a motion then? We have a staff recommendation in front of us that the application be approved. Anyone give me that motion? Thank you very much, Brenda. Okay, Brenda has given us the motion. It's any further discussion on that matter? Anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, 4.2 is a heritage permit application for 21 Allen Street. And I think that is Carolyn who's going to lead us through that. So off you go, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so you're all familiar with this property. You saw it about a year ago for a site plan application. This is for a new house to replace the existing two-story house you can see here in the image and the detached garage. Next slide, please. And just a reminder of where it's located. It's at the end of Allen Street at the lake side, and it's located within the 1st and 2nd Street Heritage Conservation District. And just to note, again, its location, because I will be speaking a bit about the uniqueness of the lot being at the end and just the size of it and being the end of Allen Street along the lake. So there you can see it shaded in gray. Next slide, please. So again, the property is designated as part of the Heritage District, the 1st and 2nd Street one. It currently contains 1950s to 60s house and 1970s garage. And the application again is to demolish the house and garage, which is considered to be non-contributing, and construct a new two-story house with attached garage. Part of this application, or not the subject application you have today before you, but part of the overall proposal includes the reconstruction of the historic tea house. So that would be a replica of the historic tea house that was on the site. The owners already have a heritage permit for this in place. So you will see the tea house included in some of the drawings and the overall proposal that you have before you, but it's not actually part of this heritage permit application because it's already been approved. And finally, there is landscaping included as part of this application. So in terms of the process, there was a site plan application that came before the committee for comments because it is within 50 meters of the lake. There was also a committee of adjustment application for minor variances. These were presented as part of the site plan application to the Heritage Committee, and they were approved by the Committee of Adjustment this past month. So we're now in the final stage of the process in terms of heritage review and from the Heritage Committee, that is the heritage permit approval. Next slide, please. So again, just showing a couple views of the property to the right for the if you go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. You can see the access to the trail there. So at the end of Allen Street, there is access, public access for the trail with the property located on the left side. Next slide. And again, this is the historic tea house when it was in its original location before it was dismantled. So again, this has been dismantled to be replicated on the site, but located further in towards the north. Next slide. Here's a landscape plan showing the proposed new house. Not much has changed in terms of the general layout since you've seen it through the site plan process. You can see in the bottom portion towards the right, a little bit difficult to see, but you can see the tea house located. So again, this has been moved back from the lake side. In the grade section, you can see the proposed house. In the far left-hand corner, one of the changes you can see since the site plan application was brought to the committee is changes to the driveway. It was previously larger and that's actually been minimized. Where you can see the diamonds, diamond shapes, those are a space that could be used to drive on, but it's actually going to be a mix of sod and pavers. And so that minimizes the amount of paved or space using pavers to minimize the impact of the driveway, but would still allow access to a third bay of the garage, which has been designed to be camouflaged in a way to minimize its visual impact. So I'll take you through the elevation drawings to give you more details on that. Next slide, please. So here is the view the west. This is what you would be seeing from Allen Street. Very similar to what you saw through the site plan process. One of the major changes you can see is the third bay of the garage to the right of the two garage doors. It looks like it's a set of 3 windows. Those would actually be the garage door set back. So really it looks like it's part of the breezeway in the house as opposed to a garage space. So this is in response to some of the comments made by the Heritage Committee and by staff, where we requested them to go a little farther to minimize the impact of that third bay. So again, really from the street, it looks like it's a 2-car coach house style connected to the 2-story house through a breezeway. Otherwise, most of it remains the same. You have a cedar shingle-clad building with some elements of stone. Of course, all of these details are subject to final details to be submitted to staff. You've got fairly traditional styled windows on these elevations that are facing the street, and a little bit more contemporary facing the lake. Next slide, please. This is from the north. You can see the front door, the traditional windows, dormers. They are proposing to use a gray slate roof. The color would be similar to, and shape would be similar to many of the gray asphalt roofs in the area, but the material itself would be slate. Next slide, please. This is the view from the lake. So again, this is where we're getting the larger glazing, which is consistent with most homes where the back of the house has a bit more glazing, or the house portion of the house that is facing the lake. Next slide. And this is the view from the east. So again, mostly shingle clad with more traditional styled windows. Next, please. Again, this is just looking at the footprint again, showing where the house sits in relationship to the rest of the property. There will be more landscaping and a pool to the rear, and some more details will need to come to staff for some of those landscaping materials, etc. Next, please. This is a rendering showing the house. Now, again, one of the comments that came from the Heritage Committee last time was the proposed cedar shingle cladding being a darker brown was too dark. They are showing it in a lighter cream color stain on the wood shingles now. So looking for feedback from the Heritage Committee on that. As you can see, the third bay of the garage is very difficult to read as a garage door. And you can see the diamond pattern on the ground where it appears to be more landscaped rather than a driveway. But if needed, that could be driven on to access the third bay. Next slide, please. This is a view from the street. In the previous proposal, and I'll show a slide coming up on this, there was 2 sections of stone wall being proposed. Those have been minimized to 2 stone pillars and a metal fence, which is pretty consistent with others within the Heritage District. Next, please. This is the rendering showing the house from the lake. And again, the tea house is shown on the left-hand side. It was relocated back because the seawall has had to be reconstructed. So the tea house is fairly close to where it was before, but of course in a safer place towards the house. Next slide. One of the things that was requested through the site plan process was streetscape views to show how the house fits into the neighboring properties. So this is actually a view from the lake, showing the house adjacent to it on First Street. So the proposed house is on the left. So again, similar height overall to the adjacent house, but the grading is higher. So it's kept that consistent look from the lake view. Next slide. And here's a view showing it along 21 Allen Street. So again, this was just to show that the height of the proposed house is consistent with the two adjacent houses on this street view. Next slide. So again, there were minor variances. These were provided through the site plan process. I'll just go over them briefly again. The first two are related to the tea house. So these were to make sure that the tea house was in a location as close as possible to its historic one. But because that didn't meet zoning, there were a couple variances required for that. The next one is a very minimal one that really has no impact from a heritage perspective because it's really it's a window well, which is below grade. Number 4 is for a rear yard setback. Again, it's a unique location where it's at the end of Allen Street and the lake. So instead of getting closer to the lake or the front of the property along Allen Street, the idea was to minimize the rear yard setback. So that's what that variance is for. The next 3 are all sort of related to the garage being a 3-bay garage. So the driveway is, again, beyond what was zoning permitted, but they dealt with that by changing some of the materials. So visually, it doesn't actually appear to be as big as this. And number 6 is also related to this with the walkway accesses to permit the walkways to be 2.4 and 2.6 meters in width. Again, they're connected to the one side of that driveway, which was beyond what was zoning permitted, but visually heritage staff had no concerns with it. And finally, the floor area for the garage is above what zoning is permitted, but because the design of it was done in such a way to minimize the actual look of it being a larger garage, staff had no concern with that either. And so all of these were approved at the January meeting of the Committee of Adjustment. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through the main concerns that were provided by the Heritage Committee at the last meeting where the site plan was reviewed. The first was that the color of the cladding was too dark and that it didn't correspond to the lighter white color of the tea house. They are now proposing a lighter cream color. Secondly, the driveway should be reduced to minimize the amount of hard surface. Again, the third bay is a mix of sod and stone pavers, so that has reduced the amount of hard surface. The stone walls along Allen Street should be reduced, so those were replaced with 2 stone pillars. Fourthly, there were concerns over height and massing and making sure that this streetscape view was submitted to ensure that the height was consistent with neighboring homes, which they've done. And finally, we requested further refinement of the third garage bay in order to create the appearance of a 2-car garage. And that has been done by changing the third garage door to a set of glass windows that appear as glass windows, but are actually a garage door. Next slide, please. And just showing the renderings here to show the difference in terms of materials. Of course, renderings are not perfect, but they give you just an idea here of the difference in terms of the garage style, the garage door, and the surfacing of the driveway, as well as the colors of the materials. Next slide, please. And this is just one more view. Again, you can see the stone walls being replaced with stone pillars and the change to the colors of the cladding. Next slide. So in terms of our heritage assessment, staff are recommending that the application be approved. There have been revisions made to respond to the heritage concerns that came out of staff's review as well as the Heritage Committee's review. The house has a traditional form with gable roofs, articulated walls, but it does have a bit of a contemporary aesthetic with references to the historic shingle style, which is seen throughout older parts of Oakville. The house has traditional materials, wood shingle cladding, wood trim, multi-planed windows, and the landscaping as well has natural and traditional materials with the restored tea house as a focal point, And again, we still will be looking for final details on some of these materials, but overall staff are recommending approval of the application. Next slide, please. So here's our staff recommendation. Again, that the demolition of the existing house and the construction of the new house be approved, subject to the following: that final details on the cladding, windows, doors, and landscape materials be submitted to Heritage Planning staff for final approval. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, and I know we have the applicants here as well.
Good. Thank you very much, Carolyn. It's lovely to see the tea house sort of positioned, and it'll look really super, I think, when this this project is finished. Okay, any questions of Carolyn? Don't all rush. Okay, it looks like nobody. Oh, Jerry. Okay.
I'm going to venture to ask Carolyn through you, Mr. Chair. This is on the color of the shingles. The renderings show the shingles very bright and white in color, and your description identifies them as cream. And I'm just wondering that you will have a sample to show the subtle change, because just in terms of the drawings, they appear a bit stark. And my memory is fickle. My recollection of the original presentation was that the shingles were quite a bit darker. In this presentation, they don't look as dark as what I recall they used to look. If you can maybe just shed some light for us on that. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Jerry. This is the difficulty with renderings, because depending on, your computer screen, depending on, sort of how they look in that day when you're looking at them. I think the idea was there were concerns that it was too dark. I do agree we wouldn't want to be seeing a stark white. I think that actually makes the building appear larger and like visually almost too overwhelming for the district. So I think we still do need to actually finalize that color. As you know, colors are something that come to staff for final approval. But from my perspective, we would want to see something that is not too white, and I think not too dark, because there were concerns with darkness. If the committee has any suggestions, we could hear those today. I know that the applicants being here, perhaps they could speak to that in terms of specific colors, more details. But I do agree from our perspective, we wouldn't want to see something too stark white and not too dark either, because you've already heard those comments from the committee. So I'll see, Mr. Chair, if there are no other questions of me, perhaps that's something that the applicants could speak to.
And we could deal with that then. Is there a sense that it's, yes, the committee the last time said it was too dark, and I think it was too dark, but has it gone too light? Has it gone from, if dark was 10, this is now 1, maybe it should have been 4. If there's a sense of that, that may come out then in further discussion, and also perhaps questions of the applicant. Any other questions of Carolyn from the committee at this stage? Nope. Okay, well, we have in fact 2 registered delegations. We have a registered delegation from the architect and from the homeowner. Now the architects, that's John Wilmot, and I know that John Wilmot is on scene. Yes, I can see his card appearing. I don't know, John, if you and Mr. Madden had decided who would speak or who would speak first. John?
Thank
Yes.
you, Mr. Chair. Craig Esposty from our office is also on the line, so but I'm happy to. I think the issue is about color. Carolyn used the term brown and cream, and rightly so from the renderings. I think we were looking at something that was a little bit more in the gray black tones and the slate roof. So
It's 10 o'clock.
I'm sorry. Anyway, we fully anticipated dealing with Carolyn directly on that and providing.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Wilmot directly? Nope. And Mr. Madden, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'll leave it to John's good hands. He doesn't like me talking much.
Well said. Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Madden? No, okay, guys. It's if there are no other questions, and okay, so it's confined now to the board. Okay, any discussion on this application? Is everybody happy that it met all of the concerns that we expressed before? Jerry, I can see you waving your hand. Anybody else wish to speak? Jerry, you're on for the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I just wanted to say that the changes brought forward from last time are quite nice. I particularly like the way the garage door was handled. I know that I have a small scale drawing here of the proposal, but you can hardly tell that it's a garage door. So I think it's very cleverly done. And I think on the whole, the proportion of the house is looking quite lovely. So kudos to you, Carolyn, and to the designers. I think they've brought this along very nicely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Any further discussion? So does anybody want to give me a motion? We have a recommendation from staff. 4.2, thank you, Councillor Gittings. And I meant to note earlier that I love your backdrop, because we talked about the etching down at the stables at our last meeting, and it's just lovely to see them actually in place. So,
and thank you, Chair. It's close as an office as well. It's rather lonely here this morning. Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Giddings has given us a motion to approve the staff recommendation. Any further discussion on that? Anyone opposed to the motion? The motion is carried, and thank you everybody for a lot of good work. We're looking forward to seeing this project completed. Thank you, John, and thank you, Mr. Madden. Okay, next item is item 4.3, which is a notice of intention to designate the GS Woodhouse at 2487 Old Bronte. And I think that's David again. Yes, I see you there, David. So off you go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait for the presentation to, there it is. Okay, so as mentioned, this presentation or end report is for the proposed designation of the home at 2487 Old Bronte Road under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the aerial, the home is located on the east side of Old Bronte Road, south of Dundas Street West, and it's in the historic Palermo Village area. Next slide, please. So a little background on the property. It is, as mentioned, in Palermo Village. It contains a 2.5-story brick vernacular Edwardian home that was built between 1926 and 1932. The property also contains a modern detached garage that was built in the late 1980s, but does not have a heritage value. The home was built for George Stanley and Fanny Ethel Wood, and who from approximately 1920 to 1945 were the proprietors of the general store that was located at the northeast corner of Dundas Street and what was then just Bronte Road. And finally, heritage staff have completed a historical research report and heritage evaluation of the property in support of the recommendation to designate the home, and which is attached as Appendix B in your agenda package. And you can just see on the photo on the right-hand side is the corner store with the GS Wood sign. So that was when the Woods were the owners of the store. And on the left-hand side is a front photo of the front of the house. Next slide, please. So in terms of the evaluation of the home's heritage value, it was done according to the criteria within Ontario Regulation 906, and has determined that the property meets all three criteria, so the design and physical, historical and associative, and the contextual value. In terms of its design and physical value, it's a representative example of a vernacular Edwardian architectural style, which also shares characteristics of the American forest square type of home. It is historically associated with the Wood family, who were the owners of the property from 1924 to 1976. And as mentioned, the Woods were the proprietors of the Corner General Store, which was a village hub that served the commercial and social needs of the village, as it was also home to the village's post office and telephone switchboard exchange. The property is also associated with the development of Palermo Village, which is the oldest settlement in present-day Oakville. And finally, contextually, it is linked to its surroundings and supports and maintains the area's character as a settlement that developed and evolved over the 19th century to mid 20th century. And so while the area, obviously has been urbanized quite a bit, there still does remain a cluster of historical dwellings of late 19th century and early 20th century architectural styles in the immediate area along Old Bronte Road that still have notable associations with Palermo and also serve as a reminder of the settlement's history. Next slide, please. So here are photos of the front and the north side of the home. So as you can see, it has a relatively unadorned and simple design, but still does have a formal arrangement of building features that are really most clearly evident on the front facade. The key attributes include the 2.5-story form, the hip roof with center dormer, the brick walls, the off-center porch with squared half columns set on brick piers, and the fenestration pattern on the front facade with the 2 narrow second-story windows and a single wider ground story window, including its cut stone sills and brick jack arches. And just to note that all the windows are modern replacements. So it's just the window openings that on the front facade are some of the main attributes. Next slide, please. So here's just 2 photos. On the left-hand side is a photo of the rear, and on the right-hand side is a photo of the south elevation. Next slide, please. On the left-hand side is an old postcard. I think it's from July 1908, and it was when the store, this is prior to George Stanley Wood's ownership of the store, when James Dobson owned the store. And on the right-hand side is a photo of Fanny Ethel Wood on the phone in the store. And this would have been after George Stanley's death, which occurred in 1945. So this would have been Fanny Ethel Wood carried on as a part-time employee under R.B. McGill's ownership of the store. And just note that the corner general store was one of 2 general stores in Palermo Village in the early 20th century. The telephone switchboard exchange was operated by Fanny Ethel, and George Stanley Wood was noted as being the postmaster and up until his death. Next slide, please. So in summary, the property's physical, historical, and contextual value establish the home as a significant built heritage resource that does merit designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Also of note is that the property is located within Palermo Village growth area in the livable Oakville plan. And so therefore we acknowledge that this property will be subject to redevelopment and intensification, just as is seen to the property to the south, the old Wet Lawfer House at 2467. So there's a very good chance that the house may need to be relocated close to the road on the property. Potentially some of the rear part of the property may be reduced in size so it can be incorporated into a new development. The livable Oakville plan does have policies that speak to its integration, heritage resources integration to new developments. And that's basically what we expect here in the future. So far we don't have any development applications, but we expect we will get an application in the near future. And upon its submission, the proposal will be evaluated on its merits to ensure the key heritage attributes will be preserved in the new development. And just lastly, a staff report on this matter will be presented to Planning and Development Council on March the 7th. Next slide, please. In terms of staff recommendation, it is for the notice of intention to designate the property be issued under Section 29, Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act for the GS Woodhouse at 2487 Old Bronte Road. And that concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have. And just a note that the property owner and their planners are also on the line here.
Super. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much. Now, just to be historically correct too, you showed a photograph of Mrs. Wood operating the telephone, and she was described as Mrs. G.S. Wood, right? In the old days, she would have been Mrs. G.S. But then you said she was a widow. He would have died by that time, in which case the paper should have described her as Mrs. F.H. Wood, because a widow went back to her own first name in her title. That's the kind of trivia you just love to collect as you wander through heritage. Anyway, any questions of David on that presentation? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to the delegations. Now we have a number of people. We have a Mr. Nelson, Mr. Serafini, and Rick Metellion, whom we know. Who wants to bat first? Is that Mr. Nelson? I see a hand appearing. Good. Okay, Mr. Nelson, off you go. And you can tell us who you represent, just so that everybody on the committee knows.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, councillors and staff. Thank you for your presentation, David. You did address the issues that I had in mind, which was the official plan designation on this property and the zoning bylaw that is in place. So I will be turning over to Rick Metellion to carry on the balance of the conversation with the committee. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Rick, are you coming on now? You're still muted. You're still muted, Nick. Hey, Rick. There you go. Your mute's off.
Am I online now?
I can hear you now, Rick.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, thank you, and good morning to all of the members of the committee. So yeah, so I'm here and I'm joined here by Dave Nelson, who's a planning consultant on this file, who I believe you will also know, and by our client, Mr. Angelo Serafini. So I guess yes, I have some notes and comments that I would like to make. So first of all, I'd like to thank David Addington for a very thorough and very detailed report on the building condition and its history, and also as I'll come to in a moment, we've had several conversations prior to this. I want to thank him for his helpfulness and so on as we work through some of those conversations. I'll point out that our team has had, as I say, several conversations, and in the course of those conversations, we asked that this matter be deferred, and we had suggested a timeline of 3 months. And the purpose of the deferral was that we felt that time would allow us to come forward with a development proposal that would integrate elements of the existing building into a new proposed development. There has been at this time no consideration given to development. There are no sketches, nothing whatsoever at this point. But we had asked that we could have 3 months because we wanted to bring this forward. We'd offered that our client would undertake not to alter the building during that time, and would not make any application for demolition during that time. I'll point out that he's owned the property for 6 years without making any changes to the building, save replacing the windows some years ago because the existing units were rotted, but he's on no urgent schedule to develop. In our opinion, the reason we asked for this, in our opinion, it would be easier for all concerned to work through the design and then to proceed with the potential designation afterward, if that was indeed appropriate. And again, this would all happen in the context of the owner's undertaking not to do anything to jeopardize the building. So therefore, at no risk to the town or the town's interests. We thought that this was a reasonable request in this context. However, staff has decided that they, in fact, would proceed now. We had asked through those conversations with David, we had asked for a statement to be put into the designation statement that referenced the reality that the site would be intensified, and that this would require major changes to the building and presumably the conservation of only a portion of it. Staff did not do this, although what they did following our discussions was that they included a statement in the staff report that referenced the likelihood of future development, and David made reference to that in his verbal comments just a few minutes ago. But I will point out that the actual reasons for designation and what's going forward did not reference that future development of the site. We thank staff for the inclusion of the statement in the staff report and for those verbal comments now, but we continue to believe that this designation is premature and that a better result for all could be accomplished by giving us time to come forward with a proposed design. Now, also, I'd like to stop, those are my preliminary comments. I'd like to make some comments as well about the Heritage Report and the 906 analysis. And we have gone through that, and I'd like to offer the following comments. Notwithstanding the thoroughness of the research and the quality of the report, we think it's obvious that the reasons for designation in the case of this particular building are weak. Regarding the design and physical value of the building, we have some concern with the use of the term Edwardian and reliance upon Edwardian architecture as a reason for designation. The Edwardian age is typically considered to be the period following the death of Queen Victoria in 1901 up until the First World War, although as an architectural style and term, it's used more generally. In this case, though, describing the house that was describing this house that was built in the late 1920s, early 1930s as capital E Edwardian is, I would suggest, a bit of a stretch. And it implies a design value that's likely not warranted. What this house really is a modest vernacular house that was very typical of its period of construction. Houses of this age and design are very common all across Ontario and continue to exist in large numbers in Oakville. Regarding the historical and associative value of the building and the relative importance of this house to the village of Palermo, there's a reference on page 3 of the report that, quote, the corner store was a community hub during the peak period of Palermo's development in the early 20th century, unquote. But there's no documentation or in the report to support this. I don't doubt that a general store would be an important feature in a small community, but I'm not sure that the period that's in question here could reasonably describe as the, quote, peak period of Palermo's development, unquote, or even that this is particularly important. Also, the report reasonably assumes that the general store would be a community hub, but it fails to make the case that the home of the storekeeper could similarly be considered to be a community hub or of any more importance than any other house in the village. I note that no one has proposed any commemoration of the general store where it would seem the interest would truly lie. I note as well that this house and the general store were not even on the same property, and indeed the general store was on the north side of Dundas Street and this on the south. So there was clearly no functional relationship between these buildings. It also leaves the question of the ownership in the general store and the proprietor and so on, also leads to the obvious question of where were the homes of the other various owners of this and the other general store in the village, and would there be any importance attached to them? We note that Mr. Wood lived in the house for only a fairly short period of time. As David mentioned, he died quite young. So we note that he lived in the house for only a fairly short period of time, sometime between 13 and 19 years. The report makes no mention of his role in any other aspects of community life. I would suggest that the ownership of this house by Mr. Wood is an anecdotal piece of history, but doesn't materially add to its historic value. And the reliance of the report upon the ownership of George Stanley Wood is a weak argument. I note also that it would seem that there was no research done on any other of the owners of the home or other members of the Wood family, save and except his wife. Regarding the contextual value of the building, I think that we need to be careful to distinguish between the development of historic Oakville and of modern Oakville. The report makes the point several times that Palermo was the oldest community in modern day Oakville and seems as trying to implicate that Palermo was important to the development of Oakville. But this is somewhat ingenuous. Palermo did not become part of Oakville until 1962. And before this time, and so during the period of Oakville's most significant development, Palermo was an outlying village and not a factor at all. To create some suggestion of a role of Palermo in the development of Oakville is a rather tenuous argument. Also, regarding the contextual value of the building, the report opines that the house is, quote, visually and physically linked to its surroundings. While the immediate context, I'm still quoting, while the immediate context has undergone significant urbanization through construction and expansion of Bronte Road and Dundas Street West, together with the construction of new condominium buildings and plazas at Dundas Street West and Old Bronte Road, there remains a cluster of historical dwellings in the immediate area along Old Bronte Road, unquote. I would suggest that this statement underplays a real situation. The cluster of homes that is referred to actually numbers only 4, if you include the Wettluffer house, which is presently demolished but proposed to be rebuilt, 5. They're spread quite far out along Bronte Road. The street's already dominated by new condo developments located very close to the road and will continue to be even more so as new developments come online. There is no intact heritage streetscape. With the exception of the Anson Buck house, the homes are generally small in size and lacking any individual significant interest. Creating heritage conservation opportunities in this context will require creative integration into the development proposals rather than traditional heritage conservation models. Notwithstanding what we perceive to be these weaknesses in the 906 analysis, my client is committed to working with the town to come up with a mutually agreeable design solution to integrate elements of the existing building into a development proposal, but continues to feel that a Part 4 designation is premature and asks the committee to defer this matter. He repeats his offer to undertake not to alter the building or make application for demolition while these discussions are taking place. I think that there's a win-win solution possible here rather than something that's more aggressive. For those of you who may not be aware, my client is a longtime resident of Oakville, a longtime practicing lawyer in Oakville, and a former Oakville town councillor. you can be confident that you're dealing with someone who stands by his word and recognizes the importance of appropriate development. This is not a case of a rogue development. This is someone who very much has roots in this community and someone that you can trust. And that would conclude my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rick. I think that I'm hearing two things from you. I'm hearing one, that the application should be deferred until such times as the development plan becomes a little bit clearer and the integration of that building into that development can be worked on. And then the second part of your presentation was really to present grounds that would suggest the house should not be designated at all. So these were two parts of what I heard you say, that you were somewhat not persuaded by the staff's presentation to us today that the building merited being designated under Part 4. Am I right, Rick? Are these the two elements?
That is correct. That's correct. That's correct. My presentation was that we feel that the reasons for designation are weak, and that we're not convinced that it meets Regulation 906. But notwithstanding that, we're offering to commit to working with the town and working with staff to come up with a solution that all can buy into. But we would prefer, it would be our preference to do that, not dealing with a building that has been designated. We would prefer to do that with the present listed situation, but in the context of the owner's position that he will undertake not to alter the building or not to ask for demolition during that time.
Okay, Rick. Now I can see Kathy wants to ask you a question, but Mr. Nelson, I can see a hand on your picture or your name. Were you wanting to add something to what Rick said just now before Kathy asks her question? Mr. Nelson?
No, Mr. Chairman, I just lowered my hand.
Okay, good, that's fine. Okay, Councillor Duddick, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Rick, have you had discussions with staff up until this point?
Yes.
Okay, so you're obviously thinking you've reached an impasse because they have proceeded with the intention of designating the property. So this come out of the blue is what I'm asking.
Sure. Yes. No. Yes. No. We've had discussions with staff. We had discussions with staff. We indicated to staff that we would prefer to defer this. This was actually first scheduled. The committee wouldn't know this, but this was actually first scheduled to come to the committee at its meeting last month. So once we were given notice that it was coming forward last month, we had discussions with staff. The result of those discussions was that staff made some very minor changes to the designation statement to take away references to the fenestration on the sides and rear, and staff undertook to put a paragraph into the staff report that indicated that there was an expectation that there was going to be development on the site, and David Addington did in his comments mention that today. But staff did indicate that they were not in favor of a referral and wanted to go forward. That's why it's before the committee today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, I have questions of staff.
Yes, I think so. I think we need some guidance here because, I mean, our role is really to deal with heritage matters, but it's within the context of the planning environment. And I mean, just speaking from a business background, I'm not sure why we would not proceed with the designation, because that gives us a little bit more leverage in our discussions later as to how the development might proceed. But that's just an off the top thing. That's not necessarily heritage. Leslie, do you want to give us some input here to help us to deal with this question of do we defer which is really question one. But question two is, are we persuaded by the argument that we shouldn't make a recommendation to designate it at all?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee. David Addington and I both met with the owner and his representatives on 2 occasions. David, I know, has had more conversations. As staff, we believe there are reasons for designation, and as David Addington mentioned in his presentation, we certainly expect the property to redevelop, and that this building would be integrated into that future redevelopment, and the designation as proposed would allow for that. We believe it's absolutely critical that we proceed with this recommended designation in accordance with council's direction last year, that we proactively examine and recommend for designation properties that are listed and identified as having potential heritage value in Palermo Village. So that's what we're doing. Council members will recall that we studied Heritage Village. We studied the heritage of Palermo Village back in 2008. So this has been a long time coming, and David Addington, excuse me, too many Davids on the call. David Addington has done the research, and staff feel comfortable supporting this designation. Also, in light of recent Ontario Land Tribunal decisions, we know that it is important that the designation occurs before a redevelopment application is submitted, and we fully intend to work with the applicant through his redevelopment proposal. So we're comfortable recommending this designation and that it proceed for the committee and council's consideration.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Okay, now does anyone else are there any other questions from the committee to the delegation? Jenny, do you want to ask a question specifically of the delegation?
I wanted to, there are a couple of comments, if I may, Mr. Chair, through you.
Thank you.
One being, just to get this one out of the way, it's a little, I call it a domestic detail, but I think the interpretation of Edwardian architecture as presented by staff is supported by the Ontario architecture. There's a quick website referral. Ontario Edwardian architecture provides simple, balanced designs, usually uncomplicated ornament, and relatively maintenance-free detailing, which is very much evident in this home. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, Rick. I think there's a difference of interpretations fairly, but if you look at it globally, Edwardian might be interpreted differently in another country and on another continent. But here in Ontario, it's quite suitable to identify this one as an Edwardian architecture, and there's a lot of documentation supporting this. So I would feel comfortable with staff's, David's identification of this as Edwardian, particularly with the context of Oakville and Oakville's history. On the other, my second point and comment would be, I sense a discomfort with the house being designated, and I wanted to, I guess, ask you or staff or the owner, Mr. Serafini. There have been many developments in the Bronte area that have incorporated heritage architecture, and they've been quite free, and their development in it actually has provided a branding opportunity. So a positive outcome for having the beginning of the development with the heritage architecture element. So I'm not understanding the reticence and the discomfort with having the home designated. And I apologize for the background noise. We have a piano lesson in the background. But anyway, I'd like to leave you with those two comments and a question.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. And don't apologize for the background. It's always lovely to hear the music. Okay, now does Rick or Mr. Serafini or Mr. Nelson want to respond to anything that Jerry has said? Mr. Serafini, you're on mute, sir.
How's that?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I just wanted to add that we have only had a dialogue with the staff for about a month. Actually, I think I had a phone call with David Addington just before Christmas, but then nothing much happened until January. So it's been very short, and you know, obviously dialogue is very important. But I just wanted to summarize by saying that the staff report makes it very clear that the structure itself is not particularly remarkable as a structure. What is important about it is the heritage elements consist mainly in the contextual connection with people that were active in the area and for a while lived in the house. Other than that, the house wasn't used for any particular purpose. And in fact, for the last, I think 40 or 45 years or so, has simply been used as a regular dwelling, totally disconnected from its historical past. So what we have tried to do and would like to continue to do, oh, and I should add that we don't have a concrete development plan at this point, but we have started to work on it and we have discussed it with the staff in general terms. But what we would like to do is to continue to work with the staff to come up with some type of consensus as to how, and we have made some progress there. You've heard from Rick Metellian that, you know, there have been some, there has been an agreement on some amendments to the wording. But we would like to continue to work with the staff. There's no particular urgency at this point. I don't think I'm not an expert, mind you, but I don't think the town loses its leverage by simply allowing a little more time for a dialogue to occur and hopefully a consensus to occur with respect to the development of the property. Clearly, the property is zoned for redevelopment. All around, there's rather large and I would say unexciting developments being built and being built. I myself love history. I'm a history buff. I would like to somehow work out a plan where the history of this property, the contextual history, the importance of the personalities and the uses and things can be incorporated into a future structure. And obviously some part of the building itself. Clearly the facade has some architectural interest, quite a bit actually. So I think that by allowing us to dialogue with the staff and, you know, come up with some sort of a consensus, which we could then present to the staff and perhaps to the committee. I'm not sure how it works after this. I think that would probably result in a win-win proposition. And another thing I wanted to add, not many people living in Oakville today know anything about or much about Palermo. They just drive by and they see the word, they see the name. I don't think very many people know why it's called Palermo. Perhaps even fewer people know why Bronte is called Bronte. I happen to know the answers to those questions, but I won't bore you with the details. But you know, it's a very interesting. It involves Lord Nelson, by the way, Horatio Nelson. It's a very interesting past, and you know, if that could somehow be incorporated in some manner, obviously textually, perhaps, that would be interesting. So we have a number of ideas that we would like to present and you know, for consideration, and maybe that would result in a consensus. So that's the reason for the request for a deferral. It came upon us suddenly, and I guess in a way it crystallized our intention to develop, you know, to come forward with a development proposal. So in that sense, it's good. But I think a little more time would really be valuable, and so that was the background for the request for a referral, and that's our position at this point. If you have any questions, I can answer those.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 had quite a chain reaction in this part of the world, didn't it?
It did, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. If there are no other questions for the delegation, we can ask the delegation now to mute themselves and to stand down because we're now confined to the board. As I understand the process, though, is that if we recommend to council that a motion of intention to delegate be passed, then that begins a process. And that process would involve the owners of the building and their representatives and could develop the kind of consensus which all of the parties are seeking. So from my point of view, in just sort of helping the committee as best I can, I'm not sure that a deferral would necessarily change the fact that ongoing discussions would take place, because council is not even the final stop in that notice of intention to designate, because there are appeals that can take place as that proceeds, so that it could start now. Now, we don't have a motion from, unless there's somebody on the committee wants to move that it gets deferred, we don't have that. But Councillor Duddick wants to speak now, and that would be helpful, Kathy, if you could give us something, and then Councillor Gittings as well had his yellow hand showing.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving that sort of synopsis of setting the table, so to speak, in terms of discussion. I will be pleased to give you a motion to approve the staff recommendation at the appropriate time. I appreciate the fact that Leslie, thank you, raised Michael Seaman's report, which I was on, and I think Councillor Gittings was on council at the time. Very, very thorough report. That report has been in the public realm for some time now, so I'm a little puzzled when someone says this sort of comes out of nowhere. I know that there's been considerable effort made, not only by our staff, but by the community, to retain as much of our heritage north of the QE. We tend to put so much focus south. We also need to give considerable consideration to conserve north of the QE. And I agree with what you had said. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, through you, this is a notice of intention to designate. It still has to go through the drafting of a designating bylaw, which may very well provide an opportunity to capture or to give some opportunity for the developer eventually to retain the property, possibly move it to another area on the property. I don't know, but I know we've done similar in the past. I'm a little concerned when I hear someone reference retain a portion of, which sort of to me sounds like an entrance or a portion of the building, and that's not the intention here. The intention is to retain the building where it's situated, and I know sometimes through our designating bylaw, we often reference how much property has to be assigned to placement of the building and conserving it. So I'm quite comfortable moving ahead with it. And I do think there's sufficient opportunity for the owner and their representatives to participate with our staff in dialogue. So I don't see the merit whatsoever in delaying. It's just the intention to designate.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I couldn't agree more with Councillor Duddick's comments. I don't know whether the proponent would consider a little more time. The time that we have between here and when it comes to council as being enough time. I agree with Councillor Duddick in terms of the proponents are welcome to come before council. I think the motion before us is a good one. I agree that the area and the building has an interesting past. Staff can provide a number of similar projects, one very close to this, where the home was reused very well. And so the staff position is clear. I'd like to see this approved and move it to the next step in the process, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Kerry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it looks like I'll be the lone dissenting voice today, which is okay. I think I can't remember another time, and I think I'm in my 7th or 8th year of serving on the Heritage Advisory Committee. I'm sure there may have been other times, but I don't actually ever remember an applicant requesting a 3-month deferral or asking to be deferred and it not being granted. Again, it could be, I just none come to mind. I get the impression that in fact, some of the reasons why they're not willing to defer is because the new provincial guidelines or laws are coming down in regards to heritage. And frankly, at the end of the day, we're going to have to deal with those new guidelines or legal obligations around the new provincial guidelines anyway. Starting, I believe it's July 1. And I guess my only other comments were I would have to say this is not a particularly interesting structure. Maybe I just don't appreciate Edwardian as much as I should. If this was the store, to be honest, I'd be fighting tooth and nail. But unfortunately, the store was presumably demolished so many years ago. I don't think it seems to me anyway to be unreasonable to request a delay of 3 months. So as I said, the lone dissenting voice for today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. Good comments as always. And your yellow hand is still up. If you want to take it down, it'll just confuse me if you leave it there. And I don't think we've ever had a request for deferral on a Part 4 notice of intention to designate. So we've had requests to defer before, but that's usually within the context of a heritage application. And then we've always worked with the parties because we have strict timelines involved in that kind of process. Okay, are there any other comments from any other members of the committee? We have a motion from Councillor Duddock that the staff recommendation to recommend to council that the notice of intention be issued. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing one, the motion is carried. So it will move now on to council. And as I said earlier at the head end, their meeting is on March the 7th and delegations would have to register by March the 4th. Okay, super. Thank you very much, everybody. That's a lot of good and interesting discussion on that one. Okay, item 4.4 is a recommendation that the bylaw to delegate council's power and be endorsed. Now, this is part of our regular review process of the delegation authority that council gives to staff with respect to minor heritage matters. And as many of you have been around this committee for many years, when we used to spend endless hours talking about the color of a door or the shape of the door handle, and none of us wants to go back to that anymore. And we were leaders in the pack in Oakville in developing a delegation to allow professional staff in whom we have confidence to make those kinds of decisions. And every now and again, well, frequently we get reports on the approvals that they've given, and periodically we actually review the workings of it and make amendments. You can see from the report that we've amended the original bylaw a number of times. We've done it this time with also a new pair of eyes. Gabe Charles is new to us. And the thought was too that would bring to it another focus and perhaps some other views on it. So Carolyn, you have put together this report. I think it would be helpful if you went through it for us and just showed us where all the changes are and why they're there.
Sorry,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before moving along on 4.4, can I just check the vote that was called on 4.3?
Yes, there was only one dissenter.
Right, but I just checking on the vote.
Yep. Yes, I declared the motion carried.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait for my presentation to come up. I just got a brief presentation just to go through the changes, as you mentioned. And since there are no pretty pictures of heritage buildings, I included some pictures of the town hall from the 1960s when it was under construction. You can see the council chambers portion of the building just behind the tree there, which is no longer there. Next slide, please. So again, just some background. We started the first heritage delegation bylaw. It was enacted in 2011, and there were updates in 2016 and 2018. As the chair mentioned, this is something we regularly look at to see if there are improvements that can be made. And right now we are suggesting some changes based on a few changes in legislation and other points we've noted that should be updated. So we do have a new heritage delegation bylaw being proposed today, bylaw 2022-021. So this has been attached to the staff report. And again, we are seeking endorsement from a heritage committee. And if this was to go through, we would be taking the delegation bylaw to council at a later date for approval. So again, the purpose is to review the delegation bylaw and see if any updates are needed. And we do know that some updates are needed based on new powers that we would like to have delegated because of significant changes to the Ontario Heritage Act last year. And we are also proposing some clarification on existing processes as well. So I'll take you to the next slide. So in section 1 of the changed bylaw, there is an update to the list of definitions. This is a fairly simple thing. We've added a new definition for altar in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act changes, and we've just removed a few others that were no longer being referenced. In section 3, you can see an update to the list of delegated alterations. So if you recall, and you can see it in the attached Appendix B, which is the most previously approved bylaw from 2018, we currently have a long list of items that can be delegated to staff for approval. And based on feedback from our legal staff, we've actually reversed it and said everything can be delegated to staff except for these 5 items. It's a little clearer. And just makes it easier to follow. It doesn't really change the intent overall. The idea is still to delegate more minor alterations. And again, there are 2 parts of this list of 5 that really hammer home times that we would need to take things to the Heritage Committee when the heritage value of the property is being impacted. So again, all items would be delegated to staff except for the following 5. So the first would be removal of heritage attributes. So if the heritage attributes are outlined in the designation bylaw, in the Part 5 district plan, or just identified by staff, those types of applications would have to go to the Heritage Committee. Secondly, the construction of an accessory building or a new wing with over 5 meters in height and over 15 square meters footprint. So if they are looking to do a small shed that's under that size, staff could deal with it, or a small little, lean-to tiny little addition that could be delegated to staff. But if it's over a certain height and footprint, it would have to go to the committee. And just for reference, for the 5 meters in height, that would be a smaller 1-story structure, not a 2-story. Thirdly is the removal of an accessory building or wing with over 15 square meters footprint. So again, these would be wings or accessory buildings which are not considered to be of heritage value, because again, if they include heritage attributes, it would already be a non-starter, would have to go to the Heritage Committee. The fourth one is a severance of a property resulting in a new lot. This is consistent with what we had before. And finally, any alterations with a significant impact on the cultural heritage value. So if there are any questions as to whether the application has an impact on the heritage value of the property of the district, then we would send it to the Heritage Committee, whatever it was. So that's the update to the alterations. In Section 8, we do have a new power that we are proposing, and this would be a power for the staff to issue a notice of intention to amend a designating bylaw. And this is also in response to the update to the Heritage Act, because we now need to give notice of heritage attributes that are being removed as part of an application. So for example, if all of the windows in a Part 4 building are included in the designation and one of them is being removed at the back to accommodate a new addition, we do need to give notice of that. So this just allows us to skip a process of going to council to get their approval to issue a notice of intention to amend the designating bylaw. This would also be the case if we were updating the property address. So if a property address is being changed, but the heritage building is still there, the heritage attributes are all the same, we just need to update the address. Currently, we need to go to council, to Heritage Oakville Committee and then council to get approval to issue this notice. So with this delegated authority, we would be able to do that ourselves as staff. Section 9, we have again a new power, and this is to enter into a heritage easement agreement. So the same idea, currently we have to go to the Heritage Committee and Council to get approval to enter into a heritage easement agreement. So this would allow us to skip that step and start processing the agreement more quickly. I would note that any development application on a heritage site is still going to come to the Heritage Committee for their comments, obviously. This is just to a formality in terms of getting the heritage easement agreement started for that development process. We would be able to get that started more quickly with this, this delegated authority. And finally, there are new powers to extend time limits under the Ontario Heritage Act. With the most recent changes to the Act, there are a lot of timelines that we have to complete things within certain timeframes in terms of designation bylaws, passing them, etc. So these have been outlined in the delegation bylaw. And again, this is something that allows us to work with the owners and council to accommodate a variety of different circumstances that might happen related to a property being designated, etc. So this is also a bit in line with some of the documents you'll see in Sue's item on the agenda today, where we're updating a lot of the heritage documents. Next slide, please. So just as a conclusion, again, as it has been in the past, we are basing our recommended changes on best practices being done with other municipalities. The City of Toronto has been very proactive dealing with the changes to the Heritage Act and making sure that all of their own documents and bylaws are in line with those changes. So we have been able to work with them and use a lot of their wording, which has been reviewed by their legal staff and our legal staff. And so we consider it to be based on best practices in Ontario. Again, it's an improvement to customer service. We are trying to make sure that wherever there is a time where we can make something more quick for the owners or for the applicants, where it still has a positive impact on the heritage value of the property, we want to do so. Thirdly, it reduces the time and the workload of the staff, of the Heritage Committee and the Council. So this is a way to get things done more quickly without taking up as many resources. And finally, we also believe it has a positive impact on the public perception of heritage when we're able to cut red tape in certain areas, while of course allowing us to spend time where it really matters when we're dealing with impacts on heritage value to properties. And just as another note, as part of this delegation bylaw, we would recommend that the 2016 and 2018 bylaws be repealed. And again, just one more thing to note again, as Sue's item will speak to, we will be updating a lot of our internal heritage documents based on some of the changes that have initiated these changes in the bylaw as well. Next slide, please. So the staff recommendation today is just that the new bylaw 2022-021, a bylaw to delegate council's power under the Ontario Heritage Act, and to repeal bylaw 2016-121 and bylaw 2018-020 be endorsed. We're looking for feedback from the committee if they have any. If we are ready to move forward, we will take the bylaw to council for approval, and we would be using the new delegation bylaw and replace the older ones. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Carolyn, can we leave the presentation up for a sec and go back to the list of the changes?
Sure.
Just flip back that there, just so that we've got that back again, just for a minute. Because as I understand it, section 1, updating the list of definitions. Currently, we have definitions of terms that are not actually used in the bylaw currently. So we want to clean them out and only define terms that we actually use. Section 3 is something that people might want to talk about because it's a reversal of the onus in a sense. It's saying these are the things you can't touch, all the rest is okay. So that simplifies the document and clarifies its intent. And the other ones, sort of 8 and 9, that merely starts a process. It means you can more quickly start the process. You're not going to amend the bylaw. Somebody else, we will have input, council will have input to that. You only start the process. Same with a heritage easement agreement. You simply start the process. The agreement itself has to be hammered out and dealt with through the usual processes. And extending time limits, that would be, I guess, to accommodate work within the framework of an application, where it has to be dealt with within 90 days or something, and the parties are all agreeing that it's going to take longer and they're quite happy to defer it. That's something which we routinely grant anyway when it comes to us, but it seems reasonable that you should have that. So is that a quick summary? Is that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and you're very correct. A lot of these things are just the first step in a process. So it's just to get the process started more quickly. It doesn't mean that the committee won't be seeing, the actual new bylaws, proposed bylaws, or the development proposals for a site that includes an easement agreement, et cetera. It's just to allow us to get those first little technical steps done a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, you can take the thing down now if everybody's happy that they've got it in their minds, that they know what it is we're being asked to do. Okay, any questions of Carolyn? Nope, good. That's another good presentation, Carolyn. So we have a recommendation or a motion in front of us that we endorse that change. Of course, it goes to council for all of the next things to happen. Would somebody like to give me a motion? Perhaps a non-council member would be good. George, I've got you. Bob, I got you too late. I got George first. Okay, George has moved that to the staff recommendation that we endorse these changes to the delegation bylaw. Any further discussion on that motion? Is there anyone opposed to that motion? No, the motion is carried. Super, thank you very much. Now 4.5 is an update on timber barns in Oakville. And I know that Brenda had raised this question, I think it was last year or the year before. I'm not sure if it was pre-COVID even, about our inventory of barns. So, and I think this is one that Sue has got. Yes, she has. I can see Sue there now. Okay, Sue, off you go to take us through this one.
Okay, I think everything's on right now. Can someone just nod that they hear me? Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I'm here to take us through a report on timber barns that remain in Oakville. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the background on this one's a little interesting. This was a council request that staff report back on timber barns and their respective protection statuses. And this was a result of some council discussion at the December 2021 Planning and Development Council meeting about the loss of the barn at 42436 line. And so as a result, staff have undertaken an inventory of the timber barns that we have in Oakville that we're aware of. And we have provided information on their heritage statuses, as well as any known future considerations. And so that's all been attached in your, I believe, Appendix A. Next slide, please. So as a quick summary, we've got 11 timber barns that are currently listed on the Oakville Heritage Register. And these are either as properties that are listed under Section 27 as properties of potential cultural heritage value, or they are fully designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We don't have any barns as part of heritage conservation districts at this time, at least not the size that we're looking at for these barns. And so we also have attached mapping of the barns. I think that's in Appendix B to your to the report in your agenda. And as you can see in that, the majority of them are located in North Oakville. And the one exception to that is the barn in Morrison Park, which is a town-owned property. So right now, all of these barns do have protection against demolition through their listing or designation on the Oakville Heritage Register. And so a notice of intention to demolish would be required for any of these structures. And that, of course, would require a whole process that includes the submission of a heritage impact assessment completed by a qualified heritage professional. Next slide, please. So here's our mapping. You'll actually see a number of barns here that we have dealt with in the past. So for example, barn number 1, which is 191 Burnham Thorpe Road East, we dealt with a couple of years ago, and it is the result of a notice of intention to designate settlement where the barn is going to be dismantled and then relocated in a town park nearby. 1086 Burnham Thorpe Road East is the barn at the Joshua Creek Heritage Art Center, Sybil Rampin's property, and it is staying where it is, and they've actually received a heritage grant for refurbishment of its roof. And that's just for an example. We've seen a number of these properties kind of come across our plates, and some of them we haven't dealt with yet. Next slide, please. And so 4 of the barns that I've just described are located on properties that are currently part of the phase 1 inventory of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy implementation. And so that means that back in 2016, they were included as one of the, as 4, I guess, of the 63 properties that our consulting team looked at, and Heritage Oakville saw those inventory reports as well as council. These 4 barns have not yet completed the phase 2 research and assessment reports. We don't have heritage impact assessments on them to determine if they actually are worthy of protection or not. But they kind of have a flag of like this extra level of awareness based on their inclusion in the CHL strategy, and they are listed on the Heritage Register as well. So staff are working, as you know, on the phase 2 research and assessment reports for all our CHL properties as time and staff resources allow. And kind of that's the thing to note here is that, unfortunately, sometimes our work is directed towards, higher priority projects that, and we don't get to do as many of the proactive research applications as we'd like to, but they certainly are on our list. We are aware of them. 3 of the barns are part of ongoing development applications, and so staff are already working with property owners on conservation strategies. 191 Burnham Thorpe Road East is one of those examples, and so those are barns that the committee has already actually seen, and we've got the beginnings or strategies in place for their future conservation. We have another 4 barns that are actually also located in Parkway Belt lands. And so these are, the Parkway Belt is a provincial land designation that makes it very difficult for development to occur. And so those barns, I would say, kind of have an added layer of protection, so simply because not much can happen on their property without the province getting involved to remove that provincial designation before any type of development can occur. And that is outside of town processes. Also included in the appendix is just a summary of the 6 barns that we have removed from the Heritage Register over the past 10 years or so, along with the reasons why. And I've just included that for information purposes. Next slide, please. As you all know, barn structures do pose a really interesting and unique heritage conservation challenges. Because they're large structures, they're not insulated. The gaps in between the boards that allow the air to breathe, which was very necessary for the storage of hay and grains and animals, doesn't turn out to suit adaptive reuse purposes particularly well, and obviously they're not going to meet modern building code requirements if you want to change the use of a barn to a non-agricultural purpose. And so, they require significant amounts of work either on the exterior or the interior in order to make these spaces usable. And what we've also found is that, I guess the most risky period for these barns is between the period where the use of the property is changing from agriculture to something else. And that's a variety of uses as, determined by the town's official plan and zoning policies. But it's when the properties are sold to developers. And even though they're secured according to our property standards bylaw, we find that the highest risk can happen at that time. But that isn't always the case. Some of the barns that we've lost in the past have been due to have been on occupied properties, and it's simply due to either vandalism and fire or other reasons. And so while we certainly do enjoy the challenge of conserving barns, the significant interventions that are required, they make it something that it really is only possible for a developer who has significant resources, because you're looking either at the addition of insulation on the interior or the exterior of the structure, depending on what you've identified as the heritage attributes of the property. Or the alternative is to look at what we've done in a number of cases, is to remove sections of the wood cladding in order to create these open air pavilions and structures that are then suitable for town parks. And also sometimes we're required to look at relocation as well. Next slide, please. And so the circumstances of each barn is unique, and you know that already from dealing with each individual heritage property. While we certainly have other examples we can look at, the needs and the merits of each site are usually quite different. And so we've been doing our best to work with property owners as these properties have come up for development or for change. We'd like to recognize that the town's Parks and Open Space Department has been an excellent partner with us, who have taken on the job of working with staff and developers to relocate and to kind of adaptively reuse these barns as park structures. We have that happening in a number of cases. And so what we're looking at right now is ensuring that barns that are waiting for future evaluation and work, or a future development application, to see what kind of level of security that they have. And as I say, the biggest risk for most of these properties when they're not occupied, or there's no residents nearby. So all of the barn properties that we've got on this register, if they are vacant, they are fenced, and the vehicle access points have been blocked off. But as you all know, I mean, fencing and gates are limited in their ability to prevent people who are determined to access a property illegally. If they want to get in, they probably, will, despite the best owners of a property to secure a site. I would note that our property standards bylaw does allow us to require a number of things to secure vacant heritage properties, but security cameras are not included in that property standards bylaw. And while it's something that we can certainly and do suggest to property owners, it's not something that we can enforce at this time outside of a heritage conservation easement agreement. Next slide, please. And so really the best way to conserve any cultural heritage resource is for it to be occupied and to be used. We know that the properties that have barn resources that are vacant are considered to be at a higher risk. We continue to monitor properties on the heritage register that we either know or we highly suspect are vacant or don't have a residence nearby. And we're working with property owners on conservation strategies, and then working proactively as well on assessments when we have the time and available staff resources. Next slide, please. And so simply we're just, this is more of an informative report based on council's request. We're simply asking that you endorse it. If you simply choose to approve it or receive it, that is, the purview of the committee to do so. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Susan. Perhaps we could enthusiastically endorse it. I'm not sure if that would be appropriate. Councillor Gittings. Councillor Gittings, you wanted to speak.
No, my hand wasn't up there. I'd be happy to talk a little later, though, if you'd like.
Mr. Chair, we can't hear you.
Now I'm muting myself. I mean, this is really letting the side down. Councillor Derrick wanted to speak.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. So am I correct in assuming that if we do want to pursue requiring any kind of video surveillance of vacant barns, that we would have to amend our property standards bylaw so that that would give you the teeth that you need to enforce that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, honestly, that's something I'd have to take up with legal to see if they're like, if that is something that we can actually include in the property standards bylaw. It may be. I honestly, I don't know at this time, but it's certainly something like if we were looking at next steps, that would be something that I would recommend that we consider. Right now, as I say, the best and easiest way is for us to ask for it as part of a heritage conservation easement agreement. But again, some of these properties, they're not part of development applications. They're simply just there. And if we don't have a development application or a working relationship with the property owner, it's highly unlikely we're going to have a heritage easement agreement in place. So, we can certainly ask our legal staff if there are other alternatives as well.
Okay, I'll raise that at council then if that's the case. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kathy. Are there any other comments or questions of Sue? Yes, Brenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. I just was curious, and Susan, thank you very much for this report. It's very informative. I'm curious, what's the proportion of barns, or what percentage do these timber barns make up of the heritage elements north of the QEW, do you think?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm honestly not sure. I mean, a number of them show up on properties, like I said, that are part of potential cultural heritage landscapes. So they're not like the sole resource on the property.
Mm-hmm.
But, and we do have quite a few properties listed in North Oakville, but as the North develops, we've also, moved forward with a lot of moving those listed properties to actual designated properties as the development applications come forward. I'm guessing it's a fairly small percentage. Okay. But I would have to double check those numbers, and I could certainly undertake that and just send that information back to the committee and to council, of course.
Yeah, it was just a curiosity, just to see what they represented, and if we're not able to protect them, what is the sort of some way to represent the loss to the town if we're not able to protect. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of Sue? So it says that we recommended that we receive the report. Would you prefer stronger language like endorse it? Would that be better? If somebody wants to give me a motion that can tell me which was okay, then Bob, and is your motion that the report be endorsed? I think I see your head nodding, Bob, but I can't hear you.
Yes, that would be it.
Yes, good, super, thanks, Bob. Okay, the motion is that the timber barns in Oakville dated February the 15th, that report be endorsed. Is there any further discussion? Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Okay, now another really exciting one is 4.6, which is the updating of heritage documents. And that's one that Sue has done. And okay, Sue, you can lead us through that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is truly a thrilling report. Carolyn mentioned not having many pretty pictures for the delegation bylaw. Well, honestly, there's even less for documents, which are mainly letters. And so this is just, a reference to our lovely Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries homepage. Obviously, this is the ministry that is responsible for the changes that I'm talking about today. If you've never been to the website, it is a good place to check out the information that they do have available about protecting heritage properties in Ontario. Next slide, please. And so really what we're here today to do is to show you some of the documents that we're bringing forward for council's approval as a result of the updates that have happened to heritage legislation, both the Ontario Heritage Act, the new regulations to the Heritage Act, I've got the Ontario Heritage Toolkit listed here, but we don't have a toolkit adopted officially yet, so we are still dealing with the old one, and we're not sure when we'll see it, but regardless, we do have updates required to some of our existing documents, and then we also have new documents that are required for some of those brand new sections of the Ontario Heritage Act. And, you know, to be honest, this is kind of a behind the scenes look at some of the less interesting paperwork that staff has to deal with on a regular basis, but it is an important part of ensuring that we're meeting all of the legislated requirements in order to properly conserve Oakville's heritage properties. Next slide, please. And so the staff report's fairly brief, and the appendices obviously are a bit larger because I've attached copies of all of the new forms and letters that we've been looking at. All of them have had extensive legal review to ensure that we're referencing the correct sections of the Ontario Heritage Act. But essentially, we're looking at updates to the our heritage permit application. We have a guidebook for that for people who aren't familiar with the process, and then our application form as well. As well as updates have been made to our notice of intention to demolish documents. And again, that includes a submission guide, a list of submission requirements, and the submission form itself. Entirely new documents that we've come up with are for the brand new process of notice of listing on the Heritage Register, and that's under Section 27 of the Heritage Act. Previous to the changes to the Act last year, we weren't required to issue notice to property owners. We always did. It was just after the fact, and now in this case, we actually have to notify owners before they're listed on the Heritage Register. So there's this new objection process they can go through. We have quite a number of templates now for extension of deadlines, because the changes to the Heritage Act introduced a lot of new deadlines, deadlines that are triggered due to planning applications, the new objection process to heritage designations. And so the templates are something that will be used for the property owner to complete and to provide to staff, so that we then can, with the powers of delegation, authorize an extension to the legally mandated deadlines of the Ontario Heritage Act, by consensus between both the town and the property owner. And then we have the notices of complete application or receipt of application, and notice of incomplete application. And that's new. Previously, we would work with applicants who are submitting heritage permits or demolition notices to say, you've submitted a heritage impact assessment, yes, but it doesn't include like a chain of title. That's something that we actually need. So here's your formal notice of incomplete application, when in the past we would have just sent them an email saying, hey, we need this. But now we actually have a little bit of teeth behind it, which is a good thing. And so if you have any questions about any of these documents, I am, of course, happy to answer them. Next slide, please. But really, that's the conclusion of my presentation, because it is fairly straightforward. As I said, the legal department has been very helpful in working with us to ensure that we've got everything that is legally required to make these documents work. And we really just need to get council's official stamp on them. And of course, your okay and understanding of what we're providing to council as well. So if there's any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sue. I think this is almost one that we would be receiving and not endorsing if we go back to where we were before. Yeah. George, you had a comment.
There we go. Sorry, I always having trouble getting on out of mute. I just, in reading through it, found very interesting, and I guess it'll be very helpful to staff and the homeowners. But I have one comment on page 137 of 172. Which is the notice of intention to demolish, paragraph 5B, which is in yellow, which has been changed. And I just got a suggestion that the second last line, it says the town will continue with the designation process. That should be council will continue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that change, and I will include it in the council version. I think that's entirely appropriate.
Just to pick, and just to show you, I read them.
And I was going to
say, for you.
I was going to say, I thought the comments we would get back would be from George, because with his legal background, he's used to going through all these things and spotting it. So I was kind of relying on you, George, to show that the committee actually had an appropriate role to play in this item.
Finally.
I appreciate the review. I really do. It was rather one of our more tedious tasks to do.
I suspect then that George will be moving that we receive the heritage documents update.
Pleased to do that, yes.
Good, super. Any other questions about this? So we have the motion on the floor. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Now, the last item is an information item, which is 5.1, the Province of Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force. And I think this came from Leslie, I'm not sure. But it's an information item, so we're not really allowed to chat about it. We just sort of receive it, but I'm the chair and I can do what I like. But I really would commend it to you, because you should really read it. There's a lot of stuff in here, and the legislative session has just started, and it's going to go on for a few weeks before it goes into the hiatus prior to the election in June. So we're not quite sure when some of these things might firm up or not, but there's a lot of heritage impact in there, a lot of planning impacts in there. You know, things like 11 stories as of right if you're on a bus route. Well, I mean, that does a lot on Reynolds Street, which is just across the road from where I live and is right downtown in a heritage district. So these are an awful lot of things that you really need to understand, and perhaps at the appropriate time, give feedback to those who represent you. Anyway, that's my commercial for today. All I need is a motion to receive the information items. Do I have that from somebody? I have it from Councillor Gittings. This time it wasn't just the horse wagging its tail that I'd seen. Okay, so we have a motion
Mr. Chair,
to receive the report, or did you want to speak? Okay.
If I could, please.
Yeah.
It's a very complex report. We're waiting for further information. I would appreciate an update in terms of what this does to our plans for the downtown heritage districts that staff were working on for this coming fall for public consultation. And I'm just curious, don't really want to chat about it, as you said. I know it's an information item. Just wondering if those plans are continuing.
Leslie?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming the councillor is referring to the old Oakville Heritage Conservation District, and not downtown. Yes, acknowledging
My
yes.
apologies.
So yes, and Gabe and Sue and I met with the board of the Oakville Lakeside Residents Association about that project and told them the same, that we will be proceeding as planned. The Housing Affordability Task Force report does make a number of interesting and sweeping recommendations, but we've yet to see what of them the government will act on potentially before the election in the spring. So we may see some legislation proposed that would aim to implement some of those recommendations, but until that happens, it's business as usual.
Yeah. Okay, and you were making the motion also, Councillor Gittings, to receive.
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, good. So we have a motion to receive. Anyone opposed? Motion is carried. We've received them. Okay, everybody. Our next meeting is March the 22nd at 9:30, probably virtual again, although with all the opening up, I'm hoping that maybe, in the not too distant future, we might actually get to meet together again. But we'll be very patient and we'll wait and see what the protocols are. So thank you all again for the gift of your time today. It's been a much more interesting, well, meetings are always interesting, but there were a few unexpected twists and turns today, and that was great. And I appreciate all your help in dealing with those issues. So thank you very much, everybody. The meeting is now closed. I have a motion to adjourn from Councillor Derrick. This time I did see her. So that motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.